Hey guys, can you hear me?
Hey
Hi
Chris,
Chris.
how's it going?
Yes.
Good man. It's still recovering from last Saturday. that
Us
was
too.
that was like a 10 hours marathon. It normally goes like I would say like for 7 hours, kind of like, but that one was it was a good one. All right, let me just share my screen here. But I hope it helped you guys. I mean, like I was definitely putting my sweet time to try.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean,
Awesome.
at least for me, I was like, oh my God, you just spent like you just rotated a little bit, saw it, and it made a big change. I
Oh,
think
cool,
you
man.
just compared it. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
sometimes I get it pretty wrong though. All right, I'm gonna share my screen here. So I'm gonna try to make up for some time, man. I mean, like during this class, I'm having such a hard time like focusing on the work outside of the time I spend it during the class. In the past classes, I would just like go all the way working until like 2 in the morning. It's like 3 in the morning to do more work right after the class and get things more at speed. But I'm having such a hard time like focusing this one. But the important thing is like I'm trying to do everything I can in front of you guys, which is a bonus, I guess. Like instead of like just trying to do like on my own, like after the class. But the downside is that I'm actually falling a little bit behind. So I'm gonna try to recover a little bit of the today. So let's jump right into this. So the first thing I'm going to say here is that what I have normally, like for my ZBrush scene, I normally have all my. Let me just switch back here. This is just like for memory because I don't actually need those guys anymore. This is like the very first version and stuff, right? Like, so I'm gonna just like delete those. I'm gonna delete this one just to save myself some time in here, and I have those ones saved before. So normally, like what I do to create my textures, I start with the very same mesh. But you see, like my mesh subdivided all the way before HD. I have 1.4 million polygons. So what I do is I duplicated it here. So I just do a duplicate. If you duplicate something that has HD in it, the HD is not carried together, So you just copy basically like the highest resolution before HD. So I duplicate this mesh here a couple of times. I would say like I probably use like 4 or 5 maps, something like that. Not more than that. I mean, like sometimes if I get a little fancy, maybe like 6 maps, but it's very, very, simple setup actually for the skin shader. If you had never seen like the skin shader network for Maya, I mean, like sometimes you find some people online, it's like creating this hyper complex stuff, like full of nodes. And I always believe like in simplicity, it's like, so it's basically like I try to keep things as simple as possible and extract the maximum amount of information out of it. Obviously, that doesn't apply for the displacement because we are going like very macro with the detail for the displacement, but everything else, is like all the textures, they're all painted in ZBrush and very simply, it's like a not super complex stuff. And then we plug and we test it, and then whatever needs more work, we keep tweaking, and then always like pushing to the next level. But it's like in terms of complexity, it's not very complex at all. Like everything I'm doing here for those portraits, it's like you look at the final results. Sometimes it's like, oh, it looks super cool, look at super detail and everything. But it's always a matter of like breaking up in tiny little pieces, right? And like we did with the pore, right? You start with one pore and then create an array of pores, and all of a sudden you're applying to the whole face, and then you have those little micro wrinkles, and then you have the main wrinkles, and you have the secondary forms, and then everything propagates, right? But if you isolate every single thing as a tiny little task, they are, it's like simple things that combine, like it's a combination of efforts that creates like the final result, right? So for the face here, I decided to do a little bit different this month. I normally have like the duplicates right here, so underneath it. So I have like all those copies of it, and I paint each one of them to create my maps. But since I'm saving file projects instead of like the tool, right? If you save the project, it actually saves multiple tools in here, Z tools. So I'm saving one that's my main character with this with HD geometry, and this one here is just for the painting part, right? So this is like I'm gonna erase this, but this is like just like a temporary map that I transferred from a previous model. That's just like it's kind of like the beginning of it. It doesn't have detail or anything. So just to show you what I have in here, basically like this map has this mesh has only 1.4 million polygons. It's basically the same as the base mesh for my HD. I have a SSS map that I normally don't use. This one was just as an attempt to make things a little bit more, add some more variation, in the it's like those areas here for the subsurface scattering. But subsurface scattering is mostly dependent on the intensity more than the hue itself. So if they are kind of like similar intensity here, it's not going to even create a huge difference at the final result. So I'm probably not going to use this map. Like you see all those characters I did in the past, like the ones that look the most realistic, they didn't use this map at all. It was just like across the board the same thing. But I can show you how to plug, because if you want to get some extra juice, if you find, it's like a way to, for example, like paint some veins, you're probably going to have to paint them darker. Yeah, I show you how to use. Then I have a specular map here, the roughness map. And then I have like a hair density map that's pretty crappy. Just like some eyebrows in there. Like it doesn't fit this model, actually. It comes from another model. So, but you see, like it's a very, very simple thing. We have like 4 or 5 maps here. So let's take a look at the shader network, because I need to give you like the shader network, at least like this is going to be like the first exploration of the shader network for the skin. You can replicate on your side, and then over time, as we work more on the character, I can give you more pieces to put together. So basically, like the entire shader networks looks like this right now. This one comes from a previous model, so that's basically like the amount of nodes we're going to be working with. But I'm going to break up into multiple little pieces here for you to see. So we're going to start with the main node, this one here, right? So basically what you're going to do, you're going to create like a shader. Let's do this. I actually want to do another one, just copying those parameters, okay? So the fastest way to do this is, let's just assign this shader here to my character. Just assign as is. And we're not going to be too concerned about if it's not working right now, because it's using like totally different textures and everything. So it's probably not going to work that much. But at least now we have access here to the skin. Oh, another thing, you see, like when you import a scene, basically like the way to export a shader network, you can go to a scene where you have your shader network. You can select all the nodes like this, right? Just like make sure you select all of them like that. And you can go to File, Export Selected Network, and you can save as a MB file or MA file. So I export it as skin only. But then depending on how you have your settings in Maya to import things with a prefix, right? Sometimes it messes up. So you see, this is a prefix name. It says skin only, and then like luminous right there, right? So every single node here is going to have a prefix that's going to have something like a skin only in the front of it. So to get rid of that, you see like all of them here have like skin only, right? Because it comes from the name file, the name of the file. So what you can do, you can go to Windows, and then under Windows, you're going to have like let's say general editors, and you have like a namespace editor right here. So you see like it says skin only right there. So you can just say delete and then say merge with the root. Same for whatever you brought from other scenes. If you're getting like some prefix in there, you can always do that. And now if you go back, it should be clean. It just says skin 3, and all those weird names that we had there, that's all clean now, right? So that can happen if you, depending on how you have your settings for the name spacing when you're importing something into Maya. So just keep that in mind if you need to clean up stuff, So let's take a look at this. So the best way to do it, I'm going to select my mesh. I'm going to select the shader that I just assigned to it. Remember, to assign a shader, just click the shader itself. You can either drag and drop with a middle click, or you can just like right click and say assign material to viewport select, right? So I'm going to just select it in here, and then right click, oops, assign. So I know it's assigned. So that's the skin shader. I'm going to copy this tab in here by doing that. So now if I switch to any other character, that's going to bring this to a different context. At least this is copied in here, right? So we're going to copy those parameters one by one so you can follow with me. I think it's easier that way. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to create a standard shader. So AI standard shader. In order to find it, you're going to have to go all the way down to Arnold and then shader. And then you find like AI standard surface. I'm going to click on it. So now I have this one here. I'm going to name, let's put a name like Velasquez. And then that's going to be skin, right? So we know that's the one we're going to be using from now on. So we're going to be basically like iterating on it. So right now I click this one here. Like if I click this node, this whole thing here switch to it, right? It's basically like this is contextual, right? So if I click this one, it switches to that one. If I click this one, select switch to this one. But this one here is the one that was copied and is basically baked in there, right? So this tab was copied from the skin 3. It's always floating here. So it's easy for us to just copy those parameters into those parameters in here. So that's why I created a copy of it. So pretend this doesn't exist because I'm just using it as my own reference, right? The first thing you're gonna notice here is that you start with the base, it's like this is all like a default parameters from the skin, from the AI standard surface. And by default, if you're gonna do something like we are gonna do here, which is if you expand the subsurface here, you're gonna notice is at 1. If you're using 1 for subsurface, that means like it's really full on the maximum intensity of subsurface. That means that it's gonna be ignoring the base. So like anything that comes from diffuse channel, which is this base here, it's gonna be completely ignored. This can be useful, this channel here, if you're using something, creating materials like rubber, for example. So you're gonna need part of subsurface gathering and then part of diffuse mixed in it. So it's not completely translucent. So this becomes very interesting to use, but in our case, we're gonna just ignore it. And we're gonna jump right into the subsurface in here. Let's start with the subsurface gathering itself. Let's just go all the way to 1. And when you do 1, we went through this when we created our very first, it's like shader, the temporary one a couple of weeks ago. So we're gonna just go crank to 1. Remember that we did, and it looked pretty much like white and super scattery, right? The first thing we're gonna change here is gonna be to random walk 2. That's the best algorithm we have to calculate the skin. And then here, the scale is gonna be dependent on your character, but I would say like between 0.1 and 0.140, something like that. In our case here, we're gonna use like 0.1, let's go higher, 130. So we can actually see how scattery it is, and then we can bring it back. And then, so for the subsurface color, that's basically where we're gonna plug your color map, right? So let's start doing this like layer by layer here. So the only thing we explored so far was to create a brand new shader, right? So let's export a couple of maps here. Let's get this map here, which is the albedo, right? And that's the one we're gonna be painting today, or at least like starting it today. Hopefully that we're gonna have full time to do that. So don't ask me questions. So the map looks like this, it's like without the shader, this is the flat color, right? It's kind of simple, but we're gonna approach to something similar to this during today. I'm gonna show you all the things. One thing you have to do is actually paint everything much more saturated than you're gonna see in here, because the compression later on is gonna destroy a lot of the detail I'm adding here. So I noticed this, like in the past, I would paint as I see it, and then all my students would complain about like the compression doesn't show anything. Everything's kind of pink and I don't see it. So I'm gonna probably like paint things much more saturated, or at least switch to the adjust colors in the poly paint tab and contrast everything so you guys can see what's in there, and then I can switch back to it. But I'm gonna tell you when the time comes. So I'm gonna start with this. I have albedo as the name here. I'm gonna rename it to albedo 2, just to work in iterations. And then to export the maps, super simple. Multi-map exporter. If you duplicated this from your original model, like I said, the UVs should match perfectly, right? So you don't need to worry about it. And for now, you can either do like a 8K, or in this case, I'm gonna just do 4K maps, so it doesn't take too long. Switch morph target is not necessary if it's just color, right? And that's all you need. I mean, like not even this. I mean, like you don't need to change. If I'm not mistaken, you don't need to turn on RGB. I think you overwrites during the export, but let's try. So create all maps. We're gonna export always inside the source images, the folder that was created by Maya, right? So I'm gonna do save. And then this should take just a few seconds, because if it's just color, it goes really fast. So that's going to be the same speed for exporting all the other maps, it's like, so we shouldn't stress too much about it. So that should be the last one. There you go, 22 seconds. So let's plug this map right here. So ignore this one. This is the original. This is the new shader network we're working. So I'm going to just plug a subsurface color here. Before I do this, let me just assign this new shader to this guy. I think it's assigned already. No, it's not. So it still has the old one. So I'm going to assign the Velasquez shader to it. So it's right there. And then we can actually do a quick render just to see how this looks like. It's going to look like crap because it's white, doesn't have any texture, so it's going to look really bad. So let's see. Right? So it doesn't have subsurface, a decent subsurface scattering. It doesn't have displacement or anything. So it looks like that for now. So let me just put this one on the side, and we're going to be, let's save like a couple of iterations so you can see how you build this shader network kind of step by step here. We might have to, you know, get into a little bit further with color painting tomorrow, because I think this is going to take a little bit of time, kind of trying to make up for it. Store snapshot. So we're going to save this one just for our own reference. And then let's see what happens next. So let's bring this one back to here. So right now I have the old shader in here I'm copying from. And this is the new one assigned to the model already. Let's just click this little checker, click File. Same thing we did a couple of times already. I'm going to switch to off, like for the filter type. I'm going to switch my UV tiling to UDIM, very important, right? For the coloring here is already getting linear, but it's because we didn't check like the file yet. We didn't pick a file. If we have everything correctly done, like in our settings, if I pick a map that's like a TIFF map, you should switch from linear to texturing here, right? So let's try that. Let's click the map itself, albedo 2. That's the one we got. And then that switched to sRGB texture now, which is okay, which is what we needed. So under Arnold, I'm going to turn off my auto-generate TX textures, and that's about it. So now we have the UDIM already assigned. So he found 5 maps, the 5 maps we assigned, and then he put the little tag in there so it says that's working correctly. So if we render right now, we should get a little bit different. But one thing I'm going to tell you is that this is going to be like a pure kind of map assigned to it. But I always like to put like a new, another node in between the color map and what we have in the shader in there, which is this. So check this out. The way I have in here, this is the new shader network, right? So I have like Velasquez in there. Let me make it bigger. It's just like I hate this 1080p resolution. It's so limited. So I have this one, and I have the color map assigned right at the subsurface color, right? But I wish I would like to have more control over the color, because sometimes you're doing some tests, and then all of a sudden you start rendering stuff. It looks too saturated, you know. And imagine that that thing that I mentioned before, you know, is like if you're trying to copy the color from a picture, you're trying to just represent what you're seeing there. You're actually not eliminating the subsurface scattering, right? There's no way to do that. Even when you get the image from a scan, everything comes with the subsurface baked into it, right? You can eliminate the specular, like you know, polarize the picture and everything, but the subsurface is always baked into the color itself. So I like to have that control, because sometimes I like to add incorporate a little bit more blue to the skin itself, and then basically like the subsurface scattering, because it's kind of like orange red, it kind of brings the warmth back. And then you kind of level things up, you know. So instead of having that super saturated reddish color at the end, you're going to have something that the skin itself, it's kind of like a little bit more pale. And then the subsurface re-adds that warmth to the whole thing. So to do that, I can do with a couple of different nodes. In the past, I would use like Maya's nodes. But here I'm going to use like an Arnold node, which is like under, let's see if it's utility, or I think it's utility. So if you scroll down, you're going to have like color correct. It's right there. So utility, color correct under Arnold. So I'm going to click this color correct right here. And it's a very simple node, right? Just right there. All you have to do here to connect it, we have to put this node in between the file itself and the shader, right? So I just like to make more visually understandable here. So I'm going to just click this little dot in here where it says alt color. I'm going to click and drag to input, right? And then from the output, I'm going to click and drag where it was before. So now it removed that old line in there. And now I have a color correct node in between the file and the shader, right? So this is very useful if you're using like different color maps for your shader network. For each one of them, you can actually use the same thing, because it's very useful. So the way it works is like this. If I go back in here, right? So remember I plugged that file straight away right here, right? I click in here, I added the file. But now that little tweak that we did in there, now if you click this, instead of seeing the file itself, you're gonna see the color correct node. And then if you click input, then you're gonna go to the texture itself, right? So the texture itself, you have controls for it. You have the color balancing here. You can get, for example, like your white point and turn into a different color, for example, and make everything more bluish or pink or whatever. But this is a very hacky way to do it. It's just like, this is the general thing, right? You can tweak the exposure and stuff like that, but it's better to do with the natural color correct node. You have more control. You see, like, you have gamma, hue shift, saturation, contrast, all that stuff. So let's do like a quick test in here so you see how it affects the model. So if I pick like a small piece, like let's pick like the ear here, and let's do a little quick render like that. So look what's gonna happen here if I increase the gamma, for example, like to 2, right? It's much more pale. If I go, for example, back to 1, if I start playing with the hue shift, right? You can get like into some green alias in there, or like some Thanos, right? You can do all kinds of stuff with that. Sometimes it's a minor kind of thing, like if I do like a -0.002, something like that. So it adds a little bit more magenta to the whole thing, but without like messing up too much. So a little tweak here and there. The saturation, for example, like that's one I'm probably going to be using the most, right? Because if the skin is like came like super orange, you painted something, you matched a picture you saw online, right? But then you added subsurface scattering. So the mix of that color that you thought you're copying so perfectly mixed with the subsurface scattering turned the whole mesh like pretty much like orange at the end. So you can come here to the saturation and just bring this slightly down. So from 1, you can put like, let's start with smaller numbers like 0.920. Let's see, 0.9. If it's too much or too little, right? So the contrast point here, you have like some extra controls as well. This one I think has to do with the multiply. So let's see if I do like the multiply here. Imagine if you want a little bit more blue to the whole color, you can click, for example, like something like this. Let's do like a little bit like this type of blue. I'm gonna bring down here. Then I can bring it down almost to nothing, and then just incorporate a little bit of that blue, just at the very, like almost nothing, it's like just a tiny little bit of blue incorporated in there. So you can actually tweak the color of the skin shade, the skin map right here in Maya, What I try to do, obviously, is like I use this mostly like for a kind of like a concept kind of thing to find out what type of result I'm gonna get. But then if I can, for example, like go back to ZBrush and eventually adjust the colors in ZBrush to create something that's a little bit more, a little closer to those adjustments here, then if I do it correctly, sometimes I completely eliminate this node here, But for the most part, I keep this node around, even if it's just tiny little tweaks, it's like a fraction of a little tweaking there, because it's always useful to have it around, Now, I mean, like I'm turning the face completely pale in there, so it's like for pale skin works. But I mean, like he was kind of like a Spanish guy, so I don't know if he had like a more tan in his skin, right? But at least we have this node here, and we can play like, for example, like bringing the gamma down, for example. It's like in getting the skin to look a little darker, right? And if it's too dark, then bring it a little bit higher again. But this node here is very cool to just have it around. Let's keep it 0.9 here for the gamma too, something like that. So there's already like a big difference between this side and that side right there. So let's just move on. So this one was the first little node that we added. Now we're gonna need some radius. And the radius here is gonna be basically the subsurface scattering itself, right? One thing that we have to check, if you go to Arnold, you just type in your search engine, Arnold 5 manual. Let me just show you this. It's I pointed, kind of gave a preview of this stuff here, but let's go more in depth now. So like the Arnold 5, if you type Arnold 5 manual, you're gonna get to this page here. Is the first link you find, and you have everything in here. It's very well explained. So under shaders, it might be a little. So we have surface, blah blah blah. Let's try. Let's see, surface. Yeah, surface. And then you have the standard. standard surface. Now we're gonna have, it's basically like a Uber shader, so you can create like any type of material, right? Skin, metal, you know, whatever, you know, there's all kinds of stuff. And then here you're gonna have subsurface if you scroll down. So if you click subsurface is one of the parameters for it, and it's gonna break down how the subsurface works, right? There's some very cool examples in there, pointing out that the normals are very important. If you have flipped normals, you're gonna get like very dark stuff, kind of like the model is inside out, right? The different types of subsurface, like all kinds of parameters, everything is in here. And then if you scroll down here, it talks about the skin itself. And it says this, look, instead of distributing all the colors with the same amount, you can also choose different radius values for each of the RGB colors. For example, a material like clay or skin should have a higher red radius than green and blue. So you should use a value like when rendering skin, 0.35 is 0.2, indicated that the red should scatter deepest and the green and the blue last. So basically, like the way they do this, they actually use the RGB to create almost like 3 layers, you know? So basically like the deepest layer is gonna be this first color here, which is the red. So you're gonna control how deep it goes. The second one is kind of gonna be like I don't know, like a subdermal, right? And the blue one would be the epidermal, basically. So they kind of like split in like 3 layers of skin, but then just using RGB colors, which is an interesting concept, right? So we're gonna do something similar, but I noticed in the past that if I do this, those same values, let's just try to translate them in here. Because we're using a color correction here because of the whole ACES issue, right? You're gonna see that these colors are not gonna translate perfectly in here. So if I just put, like, for example, I have my color management on in here. If I try to simply put those colors in there, he's using RGB 0 to 1, right? So I'm gonna switch to RGB 0 to 1 in here. And I'm gonna try to plug the same colors he has. So he has 1, and he has 0.35, and he has actually 0.2, right? So it looks very saturated in there. If I switch back to HSV here now to see how that color looks like, it looks like that. But check this out. If I turn off my color management, it's a very saturated color, you know? So I think like the best way to approach that, either you turn off the color management for ACES as a starting point and then tweak later. And then you plug those values. Let's see, like 1.35, 0.2, right? Then let's go back to here. Sorry, to HSV. You know, it's like when I switch back to HSV, one thing that I noticed when I use that type of subsurface that they suggest in there is that this color in here, this came after like trying things, you know, it's like, it's exactly what they're doing. They're suggesting in the manual, 1, 0.35, 0.2. But if you have any value on the saturation above 500, you start getting more and more of that green tint that's very famous with you know, it's like subsurface scattering. Sometimes it scatters and becomes green, right? So if you bring this one down, let's say like to 0.490 here, something like this, it's more likely it's gonna work better, you know, it's like for the subsurface. Don't worry, still gonna work, still gonna look reddish and everything. It's just, you know, the saturation is smaller, it's easier to control things. And one thing that I did in the past too was I would bring this, let's see, like, let's try with the color management now. Let's see what happens. So it's around like 0.236. So this value here, so is around like 800 and 800, 600. I believe this one I would bring to around like 400. So let's try that. Let's try to do like a 900. Let's try 600. And then 400, 900, 600, 400. This one has color management, RGB 0 to 1. Let's see HSV, how it looks like. If it's a little bit too orange, still is going to scatter quite a bit of red, right? But if it's still a little bit too orange when we scatter it, you can actually bring this one slightly down, you know? So if you look, let's say like in HSV with the color management on, let's shoot for something around, let's try 20, 0.5, and then 0.9 is fine. So let's try it something like this. So 20, 0.5, 0.9. So that's basically the color of the radius in there. You see, like Right here, it shows the color with the color management, but outside it looks quite reddish and saturated, right? So that's kind of like the RGB version of it in there before ACES. So let's render this one again. Before we do, let's just save this. So let's see, view, store. So we started with this, then we went to this after having the scale corrected. And now we added some subsurface scatter color. So let's see how that plays out. So now I'm getting a little bit of a different result, right? The ear looks a little bit like, you see, even though it's quite, you know, kind of like a orange, very pale orange when you see like with the color correction in here, it's still quite saturated in there, and it's already translating into the ear, right? So between this one and this one, you can get like the little effect in there already. Let's see if we can do a nose comparison. So the nose is going to be right here. Let's try. The nose is always very good if you have like a contrasted version of your lighting like this. You can actually see some darks on the other side. You can see how much it scatters around here. So let's see. So it's quite nice already. You know, it's like, so got some nice depth in there. It's not like super glowy. I think like sometimes when I look at something like this, it looks a little glowy to me, a little bit too much. You know, but maybe with a little bit less saturation would work. And depending on the scene, the way you have the illumination happening, obviously it's going to look a little nicer or too strong sometimes, you know. But I think like as a starting point, it looks good. So if you use those values, it should be good. Like 130 for starting, right? But then probably going to go a little smaller than this later. For the radius, again, just to see here, if the color management is on, and you're using ACES, so I'm using like 20, 0.5 is 0.9. If you're using RGB, so those are the values, 900, 0900, 0600, 0450 in this case. That's basically like just as a reference for you in there. And then the color is already different from what we had because we did that little color correction node, right? Now let's explore the other things in here. We have a couple of things that I did for this character, for the specific character I was working on before. And it's something that I did very different from other classes I did before, which is basically this. If you click the Advanced tab, actually not the Advanced, the Geometry tab. In the past, like if you watch the old classes, I was using like a bump map for the micro displacement, right? So for the micro displacement, I'm using like a node that Adam actually suggested me to use, which was a crocodile skin, crocodile cell, right? And it works very nicely, you know. So I kind of adopted that. But instead of using as a bump map, I'm actually mixing and making it into a displacement map, right? So that's going to be the difference here. We're going to be using that as a displacement map. But let's just copy from my node in here. Let me just get this to the side so it's not too much confusion in there. So I have a node in here. Let's see, cell noise. I can show you this right here. So the cell noise in here, you see like I'm using a couple of different nodes. This is going to be a little bit more complicated than the previous classes, I think, because I'm using multiple things combined to create my displacement map. And it's just like, it's not super complicated. It's just like two extra nodes, right? I'm using this plus minus average and then this luminous. And what I'm doing is actually combining the displacement map with a cell noise, which is the procedural, right, for the micro displacement. So the advantage of having both of them combined as a displacement map is that at the end of the day, if you have like something like a coat, the coat should ride right on top of the surface itself, because the bump map is not quite like is not deforming the surface, right? So what happens is that if you have a lot of coat, it kind of overrides the bump map and everything goes flat. So it kind of like fills up all the little gaps, you know, it's like it looks like a flat thing. So that's why I opted to use both of them combined into a single displacement map. And this can be very useful. I mean, like for you guys in the future, you know, it's like if you want to combine two different displacement maps, let's say you created like all the pores, right? Like in one pass, and then you can export it as a displacement map. And then let's say you painted like veins and things like that in another displacement map. This is an interesting way to combine both things, you know. So let's look at how this whole thing works here. I'm gonna add a displacement map node first. So to add a displacement map, I'm gonna go all the way up here in my shader network, right? Which is this one here, the Velasquez one. So I'm gonna click on at this little arrow in here. I'm gonna click on it, which is basically the same as clicking at the top of your shader network. So you have your shader in here. If you click this blue node in here, which is the top of it, it says standard surface and it has a SG at the end. So basically, like if you click on it, you go to the same spot. So this is just like a shortcut, right? Basically, like if you click this guy here, if you're in the shader, click that one, you go to that same node because it's the top node. So you go to the next one. And then for the displacement map, I'm going to assign the same map that I had assigned before. So I'm just going to go to File, right? And check this out. Instead of like clicking the file here, just picking the file at this point, let's just pretend we're not plugging anything. Let's look at how this was connected in here. So it's pretty much like, you see, like it has this lot in here for the file, but I didn't pick any file so far. So what it did, it basically created this displacement shader here attached to the displacement shader right there, right? That's basically what we did. But no file was assigned just yet. So let's take a look at this shader, this node here. It's called AI cell noise. Where are we gonna find it? Let's take a look at the down here. Actually at the top, I think. Let's see, texture. So if you go to Arnold texture at the top, it says AI cell noise, right? So I'm gonna click on that one. I'm gonna create a new one in here. I can actually name it, and I can just put like, so I'm not confused, Velasquez. Oops, with the Z at the end. So now I have that little node. And let's do the same thing I did before, copying that tab. I'm gonna click this one here. This is the old one I have, just as a reference. I'm gonna copy it to the side. You don't need to see this. I'm gonna just translate those values to the same node that we have here. So this is the new one. So what I have in there is basically I'm switching from noise to alligator. And then I'm turning off the additive. And then I'm using like 8 octaves in here. And then for the scale itself, this is a funny thing because if it's like the smallest the scale, the bigger the detail is basically. So basically like you're gonna have like just a few of those cells assigned across the whole model if you have just one. But if you do like a 50, for example, it multiplies that value by 50. So that means you get a much smaller detail overall. So imagine that the higher the number, the smaller the detail is gonna get basically. So as a test here, let's do something weird. Let's assign to this character here a brand new shader, which is just like a plain, let's just do like a standard surface, right? I'm gonna assign a brand new shader that has nothing here. And then I'm gonna assign this like this new AI cell noise. I'm gonna assign it as a displacement map, like overall, right? Instead of like using a color displacement map, I'm gonna just assign because I want you guys to see what's doing actually. So I'm gonna do that thing. I'm gonna just like probably like gonna reduce here my specular a little bit. Just doesn't get too like shiny, right? I'm gonna go to that little node in here where we plugged our displacement map, right? And I'm gonna click and drag my AI cell noise in here. Let's see if it accepts it. Yeah, it did. So basically now, this is just a temporary thing we're gonna be, actually it didn't accept. It switched to here, but I'm gonna have to plug it. I think, does it accept if I plug? No, we're gonna have to have, it has to be converted to actually, it's in color right now. I have to create like an alpha. So let's do this when I put like both shaders together. That's why I have those two nodes in there, is to be able to combine everything. So ignore this for now. Let me just assign as a bump map instead. So actually you can see, at least you can see something. So the bump map works this way. So if you go scroll down to the geometry, you have bump map right there, right? So if I click this guy here and I drag it, it should work. So it's gonna ask me to plug, it's like it doesn't have like a way to discover what I'm trying to plug in there. I can just expand the out color and I can pick one of those colors that start with red. And then the red's gonna be plugged into the bump, let's see, let's do bump value or bump depth. I think I'm gonna do the bump value. So bump value. So right here, right? So now I assign that procedural as a bump map, but it's going to be huge because if you click the bump in here, the bump depth is very huge, right? It's 1. If I just like render this at 1, let's see what happens. It's probably going to be like very weird because it's not displacing the surface, but it's actually it's like a treating as a, yeah, it's kind of okay actually, but it's pretty big. You see, like this is what the alligator skin is doing. So you see, like it's very cellular, and the fact that I use 8 octaves in there is actually breaking up this much further, right? If I play with those values right here, instead of like 8, I just use 1. So for you guys to see the difference, it has much less breakups, right? So it's a little bit less random. You can actually play and see which one you like the best. Maybe like 4, or, it's like, I don't know, like 2, something that breaks up a little bit, but without going too crazy. But like I said before, you see the scale is very, very big right now, right? And this is all bump, it's not displacing it. So let's try like going steps here. I'm probably gonna get all the way to 50, but if you go, let's say, start with a 15 here, right? So you start getting like, it's this super tiny detail in there. But also what's happening here is that the bump itself is at 1. And 1 is it's a huge number. So I'm going to start with a much smaller number, let's say like 0.05. And it's still going to be big. I mean, like it's still big. Let's try 0.01. That's a little bit better. So let's zoom in to the model here. Let's look very closely. The best area to check is like around the nose, for example. So you see like the little cells in there. So that's pretty cool, right? Like we're going to use this kind of stuff to break up the displacement map even further. But you see like it's still a little big, right? And maybe a little bit, the depth is a little bit strong as well. But we're going to use this. All the stuff I'm doing as a test assigned as a bump in here, I can actually later translate and use this as a direct node plugged into the displacement map. So instead of 15, let's try something bigger here. Let's try 30. 30 is a little bit, yeah, it's kind of like, maybe 30 is going to be enough. I mean, like 50 might be too small. But I don't want it to fight with the displacement map. Like, it's like this one looks okay. Let's try 40. And then we're going to also go back in here and then reduce the size of the bump. So 0.005, something like that. So that's going to be like the type of like the intensity of the detail I'm probably going to expect. It's like it has to be fairly small. Let's see, something like this, right? You can see some of the detail in there. When you combine this with the displacement map, you really get some interesting breakups. But the idea here is that we're going to be using this as a breakup kind of thing, obviously, but we're going to use a black and white map that we're going to filter out some areas in the face that we want to be more shiny, right? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to create roughness by using surface, right? Instead of like using just like a roughness map, we're going to try to pretend that we are working with an actual like a real world in a way that it's like if you have more breakup in the surface, you're going to have more roughness overall. So the specular is going to be pretty much flat, right? But then as we get to areas like, let's say, the lips and around the eyes, for example, in the tip of the nose, we're going to create a black and white map that we can actually control the intensity of this whole thing. Now, there's one thing here that's interesting to notice, too. You see, like, my bump depth in here, I got down to 0.05, right? Another way to do this, which is actually better, because since we're going to be mixing with other map to create a displacement at the end, the best way, I think, let's just, for comparison here, so you can see the results. So I'm going to just do like a store snapshot, right? So that's stored. So I'm going to go back to 1 in here, and I'm going to copy that value, 0.05. So I'm going to go back to 1. It's going to be very huge again, right? Now, if you go back in here into the node itself, you're going to notice that there is this, which one is that now? I don't remember which one is the parameter. I think it's the color itself. Is it the color? Yeah. So the color, you're going to control the depth, instead of like using that external node, that's part of the bump depth, right? You're gonna use the color to control it. So if you click the color itself right here, you're gonna notice that I have like the last value here. It shows me as the value, right? Like a 0.080. I'm gonna just place that 0.05 in there. And because there is a color correction, you know, probably gonna have like a little bit of a difference in there. I actually didn't even accept that much. Let's see, let's switch back like to, yeah, the color correction actually messes up things sometimes. So let's try like this, and then let's try without the color correction, see what happens. Yeah, so I turned it off, the color management in there. So let's see how it compares to this one. It's pretty much a one-to-one translation, right? Yeah, so basically like the difference here is that instead of like reducing this value here in the bump parameter to 0.005, I actually turn it to 1 again, and I changed this color in here to 0.05 in the value right there at the end. And what this the advantage of this is that now I can actually combine this map with the other map without having to, you know, poke around other parameters, because if I have this map mixed with the other one as a displacement map, I'm not going to have access to the bump parameters anymore, right? So this stuff is going to go away. And because we are doing this as a test here just to see the amount of detail we're going to get, then that should be okay when you do like when you plug everything as a displacement. So right now, how we have this one set up temporarily is just as a bump map, right? But again, we need to transfer this to a displacement map. But since we are doing this to test it and see the differences between, you know, it's like with and without this the displacement map. So without the displacement map looks like this. Let's plug a displacement map now. I'm gonna click this guy here. Remember we added a little node in there. So I'm gonna click this displacement here, and I'm gonna plug a file. Same thing, off. I'm gonna go back here, auto generate off. All this stuff is gonna go a little faster here because you guys seen what I did in the past. So udim, and then I'm gonna select the displacement that I did like last week. So there's a displacement map, but probably like it's not the latest and greatest, but at least it's something. So we should find another 5 maps right there. So 5 tiles, udim. This is utility raw. We changed to raw, right? And then see, like sometimes this happens, you know, it's like it's ballooning the whole thing, right? It's creating like a balloon in there. So it's kind of like completely out of control. So at this point here, what you can do, if that happens, is that sometimes like it's right in the middle of the render, the IPR, Maya gets a little confused. Normally this works unless something else is wrong. You can do like an update full scene in here on the render. I'm gonna click that one. And then if everything is correct, I mean, like it's gonna reload all those maps. Oh, it didn't work. So let's see, maybe I plugged something wrong in here. Velasquez LRDM. It should be correct, actually. I'm actually surprised it's not. Let's see, the X. Because we had this plugged last week, it was working fine. So let's see, let's just do like a, yeah. Let me get this back from the file that we had rendered last week. Let's see, skin temp. Okay, so skin temp, we had this guy right here, plugged as a displacement. I think what happened is that I plugged the displacement in a funny way in there. So let me just go back in here, and I'm gonna just delete this. And I'm just gonna click it again, and then file. Now I think it should work. Off. Let's see, this guy off. UV tile, and that's about it. Let's see, same map. Let's see if it works. If it doesn't, I'm gonna get the next one in there, but it should work. Okay, let's see what happens. Oh, another thing, let's see if we are subdividing this mesh here. I think we are, because we already did this in the past. So let's see. Yeah, it's all good to go with all the parameters we talked about last week. So let's try this again. Let's see if it works. Okay, so now it's displacing. So that's the difference right here. So before we had just this detail right there, right? That's just like the micro bump. And now we have the micro bump plus the displacement map, right? So now it's a matter of like finding like the fine tune, you know, it's like in what areas you're gonna need more of this micro bump to break up the surface, and in what areas you're gonna need less of it, right? So for example, like in that area where the eyelids are, you're getting plenty of that in there, but that area probably like at the end, we're gonna need like very little of it because it's a little bit more of a shiny kind of surface, right? But that's basically like the way I combined in the past, you know, it's like to use both of them. You still can use this, you know, it's like do the same way, but just bear in mind that if you're using coat, the coat probably going to eliminate some of that. We can be desirable if you want, you know, but now that we have this as a test, basically like testing a combination of displacement map and bump map, now let's try to mix both of them as a single displacement map at the end. I saved this one so I can have like a reference for what we need. And then let's go back to our shader network. Let me just bring this up here. Let's see. I have a couple of shader networks right now, and this one is just for a test. Let's try. So let's see those nodes right here. It's kind of stuff like it's a lot of little details here and there. You're definitely going to have to rewatch this video probably to capture all the little details. But so those two nodes in here we're going to need next, right? Because at this point, you see the way that everything's plugged. I have my noise, like the cell noise, like the one we just, you know, tweaked, like all the alligator skin and everything, plug into a bump node, plug into the normal camera, right? Which is like inside of the, you know, it's like under the geometry here, right? It's plugged right there. AI cell noise. If you click on it, you're going to go to this next, you know, actually the bump is in between, but if you go back, actually I cannot go back in here, I have to look from here. But yeah, this one is basically like the bump map. And then the bump depth is basically the map that I used in the past, black and white, to control what area is going to be affected by the micro displacement. But in our case, we're going to be using something different to create that effect as well. So let's go back in here and see how we create those little nodes. So plus, minus, average, and luminous, they are both from Maya. They're not from Arnold. So you're going to have to go to Maya and then probably like under utilities. And let's try to find them in here. So plus, minus, average, this guy here. I click on it. And then the luminous one, right? So luminous right here. So the first thing you're going to do here, you're going to have to plug them. You see how they are plugged in there? You have like multiple, you know, channels. And I'm going to have to create them because by default, the plus minus average doesn't have multiple. You have just one. See it? It's like input 3D, and that's it. So if you click the node itself, you're going to notice here under the input 3D, you have an option that says add new item. So you click that one. So now it has a 0. If I click another time, so we have like the 3D 0 and then 1. So we have those two right now. You don't need a third one, right? And then for each one of them, you're going to plug one of those maps. So I'm going to get my out color here from this node, from the AI cell noise. And I'm going to place right there in the first, right? And then my displacement map, which is like in the past was that one. So now my displacement map is this map right here. So you see like the out color, instead of like placing the out color, that's basically, sorry, the out alpha that I normally use plug directly to the displacement, I'm going to have to plug the out color this time around. So I'm going to get the output of the color in here, and I'm going to plug to the second input. So now I have like, if I clean up the viewing here, so I have like my cell noise plugged into the first input 0, right? And then I have the out color of my displacement node, which is like the map, displacement map. So the out color is going to the 3D 1, right? So 3D 0, 3D 1. Now we have to output this. And you see like the output right there? It outputs to the value of the luminance. So I have like this new node that we just created. So I'm going to click the output of 3D, click this one, and just drag to the value, right? So now it's plugged in there. So basically, this one already mixed both maps, is mixing the cell noise and the displacement. And now we have to output this. And you see like the output here is a value, right? because we need a value to be outputted to the displacement. It doesn't accept you to output from color, right? So if you have a color map, you're going to have like the alpha and the color itself. If you try to plug the color directly, it doesn't accept. But now we have a luminance here, which is basically converting the color that's coming from both of them into a value. So like you're going to have an alpha now. So you can go here and plug to the displacement, right? So now you have the whole little network in here. So you have the cell noise and the displacement, each one plugged into one of the 3D channels. The output of this 3D channel of the plus minus average going into the value of the luminance, the input, and then the output, the value itself going back to the displacement. And then from here is basically everything that we had already. The difference between this and what we had before is that the displacement was plugged directly. So this map was plugged directly to the displacement node that's connected to the main shade node of the shader. And then the cell noise was plugged as a normal camera, which is still there. I mean, like I'm gonna have to remove it. So if we just select this little, little arrow, you can press delete. So now it's disconnected. So everything that's happening now is basically combining those two maps into a single displacement map. So let's see how that renders. If it looks too different, it shouldn't. It should look very similar to what we have in here. But the difference is that now the specular map is gonna behave better. So let's see if it's working or if it's broken. Let's try. Seems like it's working. The cool thing is that everything is displaced now. So if you assign like a code in here, it should be pretty good. Actually, it changed a little bit like the characteristic of it because it's actually displacing it. So you see like it's actually pumping a little bit more. But at the same time, it's like if I want to tweak that value in there, remember what we did to tweak those values, right? Yeah, we have to use that. I'm going to just stop. Yeah, the color. So just going to stop it in here. So remember what I did in there. So for the cell noise, you just go right here for the color. You just go like maybe like 0.0 what, like 3, something like this. And then I'm going to try to render again. And that's basically how we're going to do to create the intensity in there. Now, using that same logic, since I'm using the color in there, the value of the color to tweak the height of the micro bump, that's going to be the same logic if you use like a black and white map here. So that's how we're going to control what's shiny and what's like not so shiny, right? In the whole across the whole face. So if I assign a single specular map right now, everything is going to look kind of shiny. Obviously, it's going to be broken up because of like all those tiny details. But later on, we're going to paint a black and white map that we're going to plug right here under the color. And then we can even do like a plug, like maybe like a color corrective node in between. So we can actually tweak like the intensity and get something that, is like reads more correctly. But that's how we're going to control where we don't need any of this micro bump, right? Imagine like the lips. If you get like just the lips in here and you render it here, you're going to see there's all these tiny little bumps right now, like in the lips. And we don't want that, right? We want this to be mixed with the skin itself, but then around the lips, we need like this to be completely black, right? So it's going to go black in here and then levels of gray to get like a little higher, all the way to white. But you see like the white in here, the ceiling of the white is very tiny as well. So it's almost like we're going to have to compress that whole thing within those two parameters, like from 0 to 0.3, right? So that's why maybe like a color corrective node is going to help us out to get the, it's like that compression in there, like that little tiny scale. But that's basically the whole concept of using the micro bumping here, right? You can try other ones. I mean, like sometimes like the cell or cell 2 work nicely, but it's a combination of using them with or without additive. I don't remember which one works the best, but there's one that when you click additive, sometimes it completely goes away. And then there are other nodes that sometimes it shows up only if you have additive like on. So let's look at the rest of the shader network. And this is kind of like the skeleton, right? Like we are looking at this stuff. And now, obviously, this shader network I'm working here is just like a new one that I created, right? Like was just like a test, just to show you how it looks like. Now we're going to have to transfer this to our actual shader network, which is the Velasquez, this one here. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to have to plug this displacement here, the new displacement, which is, let's see, this one here. I'm gonna plug into that channel. That's my main channel for the Velasquez, right? Like it's the main node of my shader. So very simple. We're just gonna click this displacement right here, click, and then you're gonna go to displacement shader right here, right? So now basically this is all plugged back to my other shader network. So, you know, the concept is basically like I create a brand new shader for doing all those tests, plugging all this stuff. And now that I know that the displacement is working, I can just plug it back to the displacement shader node of my actual shader, skin shader, right? So let's see how this works now if I assign this. Oops, it's actually rendering there in the background. I'm gonna assign it here. So I should have the subsurface scattering shader now with the displacement in it. So let's see the difference in here. So now we have this. Let's just save as a reference and apply. So now it's starting to get more interesting, right? We get like some skin shader in there, and then there's the breakup in the skin happening already, but still not ideal because obviously you have all this bumps on the lips and everywhere. It's actually assigned across the entire thing. But the specular, we didn't even work with the specular at this point, right? It looks very, very strong. But let's look around like this area here, how cool it looks when you can see, for example, like both the displacement and the micro bump assigned together. You see like how the breakup happens, like it adds extra detail everywhere, right? Around this area here in the cheeks, we're probably gonna need something like that, like the micro bump applied to it. What I can do, I can actually turn it off for you to see the difference. So let's just wait a little bit until it renders here. So it's still like very specular. We didn't change any of the specular or anything, but let me just do this. I'm gonna save this one. So view store. And now I'm gonna go to that little node that we have like for the, where is it, right here. So the cell noise. So that cell noise, I'm gonna just turn this one off completely. So like from 003, I'm gonna turn to 0 here. So 0. And let's see how that renders in relation to what we had before. Should be like a small difference, but should make an interesting, yeah, you see like it's not that small at all. Look at that. So that's the difference between have a plastic kind of surface, right? Like with a simple, without like enough breakup in the surface, and having something that looks a little bit more organic, it's like a little bit more complex, right? This, for example, like if you have an effect like this, like on the forehead, it really brings like life to the, to the detail. It adds like all this extra layer of complexity to the whole thing. It's like here it's kind of like a shrink wrap kind of plastic thing, right? But then right there, breakup, right? So the interesting thing is that the skin, as we saw, like when you look at close-up shots of real people, it's quite shiny when you look from a close-up, right? You look at very close, it's very shiny. But then when you look from a distance, everything becomes like less and less shiny. It's kind of like similar to this, it's like if you have enough breakup, it's not even like super shiny, right? In comparison to this one. But it's still shiny. So obviously we're gonna be working on the specular maps next. But just to show you this, if I just like do like a quick tweaking here, let's go to like, right now I'm using like, so I'm just going back here. So the base, we're not using anything for the base, right? But the specular we have at 1 in here, and the reference is at 200. It's gonna increase this one to about 250. And then for the weight, this, we're gonna be using a map to control the intensity of the specular, or the amount of specular. But just as an average right now, I'm gonna do like half of that, so 0.5. Just to see how that looks, kind of like, as an average. And then on top of that, we're gonna play with another thing. So basically, like you see, like right now, it starts to look a little bit more natural now, right? So we have like, let me just go back and put my my micro breakup in here, which is not showing just yet. Let's do a 0.03 right here.
Coming alive.
Yeah, right. Like it's like little by little, man, we start to bring things to life. So right now, I mean, like if you add the whole thing, now it's like there's this tiny little micro breakup in there. The skin is not that specky anymore, right? Like it's just enough right there. Now, one thing that I did that's different from the other classes as well, is like, you have to understand, like every single class I try different things, you know, to experiment with it and try to come with better results. So there are multiple ways of doing the stuff I'm doing. And you can always check out like the other classes you got, like you got another 3 ones, right? And see how I did in the other ones, because probably gonna have slight differences. But it's cool that you have like this gamma of different possibilities, you know, it's like in every single one produces the results, right? Like you can see the renders from my students and my own renders, that the results are there. It's just like different approaches. But one thing that I did different recently is that in the past I would use the specular itself as the tight spec, and I used the roughness map as the broad spec, which is basically like this the sweat pass, right? But I actually learned to appreciate doing this kind of like the opposite. And I did this, check this out. So for the tight spec, I'm gonna switch back to, I hate when this happens right there. I'm gonna switch back to using the roughness in here. I'm gonna use this for the sweat pass. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna use like a much higher value. For example, like let's say 460. I think it's 450 or 460, something like that. And then this is gonna add like a very, very broad spec, right? And this is going to be kind of like my sweat pass, basically. So this one I can actually crank this a little bit higher. Again, I don't mind too much like this value in here, because we're going to use a black and white map to, you know, to color, you know, tweak the whole thing. But even at 1 in here, the combination of having a lot of breakup in the skin and then have this sweat pass, right? It's a very broad kind of effect in here, which is really cool, right? Like it's kind of like it has this broad effect. You can see it very clearly in a model like, let me just, I'm gonna have to stop it for a second because it gets super slow in the background here. But let's say we get like, I think the main example I always go back to is the Stan Winston one, because that's the one I actually started exploring a little bit more of this double type of you know, specular, right, in the forehead and stuff like that. So this one here, for example, right, this is the broad spec right there, a lot of it, right? So very broad spec, and then on top of that, there's a tiny spec, like a tight one. So I was using this kind of like the opposite. I was using the coat for the broad spec, and then the spec itself for the tight one. But then, you know, it's like you can try both. I kind of like the result better when I had this one for the broad spec, and then the coat itself using like a smaller roughness, but not going too crazy with like going super small. The smaller you get there, for example, 0 is clear coat. It's like super shiny, right? I would say 0.250 would be a good compromise. So let's say I have something like this. Let's just incorporate a lot of this guy here and see what happens, for example. So now you're gonna have a combination of the broad spec with the tight spec right here. But the tight spec, again, is everywhere, right? We don't have a map controlling where we need more spec at this point. So later when we have that map, we're gonna point to areas like the T-zones, right? Like upper the lips, you know, or tip of the nose, some of the cheeks, a lot in the forehead, you know, it's like areas of more specular overall. But in this case here, I'm just like reduced to 0.5. So you have like a little bit of that kind of like average kind of effect, right? And now you have like this nice looking little skin in there that has no detail whatsoever, right? It's just like, actually it has a little bit of detail from the color, but so, you know, there is no like spots or anything like that. So it starts to become a little bit more organic overall, right? It's starting to come to life, which is what we want at the end. So at this point here, I think we can go back to ZBrush. And I think what I'm going to do, even if I have to go all the way until the end of this class to show you this other parts of the shader, I think it's important, even if I have to push the painting of the skin color tomorrow and then the eyes get a little bit, you know, delayed by kind of 1 day. I'm going to try to make up like in not like full days, you know, but at least this part I have to actually get you guys up to speed, because once you have this in hands, I mean, like you can assign to your models and you start playing with them and seeing the characters with kind of like a believable kind of skin to play with, you know. So I think it's important to do that. So let's see.
What's driving the translucency that's happening?
What's that?
What's driving the translucency like that's happening in the nose and stuff?
Oh, it's just the subsurface. There is nothing, like no maps assigned. It's basically like it's just like the scale of the subsurface. That means like how deep you're gonna go with it, or shallow. So let's say, for example, we're around here. Oh man, I hate this. So I'm gonna get this. So if I do a little quick render right here and I increase the scaling here by a lot, it gets like candle-like, right? So,
okay.
So basically like this one, if I can, yeah, there's another thing that's interesting too. I mean, like the radius in here, if you really crank the saturation part, it does the same thing. It gets like super, you know, even if I have this at 0.130 like I had before, like 130 right here, and then I go back to this guy here, and I decide to say like, okay, it's saturation, instead of that number in there, I want like a 4. Let's see, 4. Oh, is it doing? It's not doing. Let's go back. Let's try again. Oh, why is it not working? Do I have like caps lock or something? Weird. What? Oh, the other keyboard? Dude, it's not accepting me to do anything there. That's so weird. Let's try it with the color correction here to see what happens. 2. Weird. What's happening? What? What's my keyboard doing? Now I'm gonna mess up this whole thing here. For some reason, my keyboard is not working in there. It's not the caps lock. Okay, let's try. Huh? That's so weird. Anyway, I'm gonna undo this. That something went a little funky in there. Can I do this here? Can I type anything? Yeah, it's accepting here. It doesn't accept in there. That's so weird. Anyway, yeah, it's like I was just trying to prove a point that even if you have a small scaling here, if you crank the saturation here all the way to a bizarre number, you know, you start to get like the same effect as if you had this like very large. That's the point. So I would say like the best type of test to see how deep you have to go. It's always like using a backlight for ears, for example, but that means you're gonna have to sculpt the ears anatomically correct with the right thickness, so you can see the light, you know, it's like the scatter through it. And another test is kind of like having a just like a small light source coming exactly from the side of the face. So basically, like from the middle of the nose and all the way to that side, you would have like completely black, so like shadow all the way across, because that way you can see exactly how many pixels it uses to translate, you know, it's like to make the transition between like the skin color and the redness of the scatter and then into the black in there, you know. So you can kind of like get the same type of effect that you see in this render right here, right? So like if you get like area like completely like black in there, you can see how much it travels in there. I think this is a little bit too much. One area I use as well to see how things are is like the eyelids. So sometimes you feel like some other areas look good, but then you look at the eyelids and they look super translucent. And then sometimes I don't like that, you know. So let's try this and let's see.
Chris, quick question.
Yes.
For like different like pigments, like darker skin colors, like do you like do you find that there's a difference in the way that you're doing the subsurface scattering? Definitely,
yeah, there is a difference. I would have to go back to my character in there, like the African warrior, to see what I did with it, because it's definitely like different. One thing that always comes up as a discussion for those classes is that, you know, it's like the type of scattering that happens with between like the pale skin and then the dark skin, and it's very interesting because I was reading some papers we found actually talking about like the type of scattering that happens with the dark skin. And then check this out, like it blew my mind in a way, you know. Even if the skin color is the same, basically, like the appearance of it is the same. So let's say like you have like an African person right here, and then you have someone who is very, very tan, which, you know, probably like don't have like a lot of melanin in the skin, but, you know, it's like you can get the, you know, it's like pretty much like suntan and everything. And then the appearance of both skins can be pretty much like very similar, almost the same, but the natural high melanin skin, like an African person, right, scatters differently from the other person who is just like has a tan in it. I think like it has to do with the way that the surface of the skin is burned, so it kind of like blocks some of the you know, the light rays to penetrate deeper. So it behaves differently, you know. So sometimes it's kind of tricky, because if you're gonna try to represent someone who is like really, really sunburned, you know, it's like someone who lives like, you know, in the jungle, or, you know, it's like not the jungle, but, you know, it's like the desert or something. Probably like that skin is not going to scatter a ton, I suppose, because of like it's so beat up by the, you know, by the crust of the sun. Meanwhile, if you have someone who is like very dark skin, but it's like a natural dark skin, right? Like it's not sun tan, you're gonna have probably like much more scatter happening there. So it's a very tricky thing, you know. It's like overall, I think this scatter is it's smaller, but again, like I would have to check and then do multiple renders like from different references, you know, it's like to really double check those things. But it's definitely different. There's a difference in there.
I think black skin is a little bluer too.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, like sometimes you tend to look at the skin as being a little bit bluer, but then it might be something related to the sweat pass. You know, it's like this. Some people like to color the specular a little bit and add a little bit of a bluish hue to it. But at the same time, if you're rendering like let's say like someone like an African person like under the sun, right? And then probably gonna have like a very bright blue sky reflecting in the HDRI, and that naturally is gonna make things look a little bit more bluish, depending of, you know, obviously the type of the time of the day and everything. But let's say like if you have something that's like, you know, like right in the middle of the day, you're probably gonna have like some blues shining through the, you know, so the specular. But
I think though the like if you put blush on a black woman, more magenta than it is red.
Yeah,
That's I'm thinking it's bluer.
So if you were like approaching like a project with someone with more melanin in their skin, like how do you make adjustments based on that? Do you just like slowly lower the amount of scattering and play around with it till it feels right? Like what would your approach be to like?
Yeah, I mean, like, because you know, it's like there's an article that came up like from this dude trying to like I don't know, like probably like virtuous sign to other people, virtuous signaling to other people. But he was saying that the industry is racist because we only study like pale skin, right? We never did a study about like black skin. Like all the CG models, like they nailed the, you know, the pale skin, but never the black skin. And then, so that whole thing was kind of pointless to me. Like, it was funny because some people actually pointed to some of my renders because like, oh, there's this dude doing some CG renders here with the black skin. But at the end of the day, man, it's just like the way that I found was, you know, collect a bunch of like references and then start with the skin like this. And even the color of the skin, I tried to start with a dark skin when I was painting the albedo. And it was a nightmare because, I mean, like you cannot, ZBrush doesn't show you exactly what you're painting. And you want to add some, you know, it's like variations and everything in the skin. So what I end up doing was actually started with the pale skin like this. And I added all the detail and the variations, like the little, you know, it's like spots underneath the skin and variations and everything. And then went to the color correction in the poly paint, like, which is a new feature for the past like 3 versions, I think. And then I darkened the whole thing using that color corrective node, not color corrective node, the ZBrush new function. And that way, there was actually to be able to actually get to a dark skin, but still have a lot of variation in it. But it's kind of like if you try to paint, you cannot see it. You know, it's like it's hard to see the differences because everything is so dark in there. But if you paint like to have more variations as a pale skin, and then you turn the tone down, then you end up like getting more like rich values, you know. And then at the end, you kind of like you're gonna end up like adding a little bit lighter skin tones. For example, the tip of the nose, close the cartilages, similar to the stuff I was talking about, like for the underneath, you know, it's like how you say, like the fat tissue and everything. So depending on the person, obviously, you can see like black people with super dark skin. Like there is a girl from, where is she from? She's a model and she's supposed to have like the darkest skin ever, right? Like it's like pitch black. It's really amazing. It's a beautiful tone. But then other people, I mean, like the reference I was using, they have like those warm tones in those areas, like the tip of the nose, you know. It's got like, it's very interesting because it goes from very, very dark to something that's kind of like a rich brown, you know, it's like a kind of like orange almost. So pretty cool. So I try to, you know, represent that kind of stuff. But yeah, this is basically what I was saying about the depth of the subsurface scattering. You see, I'm getting just like enough in there. It doesn't look like overpowering or anything. I think it looks kind of natural, like for the skin. Obviously, we're only going to be able to measure everything once the eyeball is in there, right? But then my carunculate here has like all the little bumps that we're going to remove later on. Same for this area here, but it's cool to see things coming to life. So I think it's going to work out at the end. So let's see. That's the thing, you know, it's like since I have all those models done in the past, if something completely fails any of my testing here, I can simply like, okay, let me just import the shader network from that other character that actually works, and then call it done, right? But I'm actually trying to, you know, get you guys excited with my own tripping here. Kind of like, you know, it's like, let's try this, guys, and then let's see if that works. You know, it's like you know, it's like I have all those theories happening in my head. For example, like this whole thing about combining the displacement here, and I thought it would be cool. And then when I saw the results, I was like, yeah, it actually works. So it's something that, you know, it's my intention to adopt from now on. But yeah, so right now what we have plugged is basically the specular. We don't have anything, but we have already the roughness in there, 0.460, which is like the broad roughness. We don't have any transmission because it's not a transparent object. We have the subsurface with some of the details in there. So the weight at 1, the subsurface color is the color that I just plugged, the temporary one, which is going to be the albedo we're going to be painting possibly tomorrow. For the radius, we have that very, you know, kind of like generic kind of values in here. You know, again, like without the color management, it looks, I think I gave you the values in there, but it changed a little bit after I switched in here. Yeah, that's weird. You see, like when I switched to color management, yeah, I think like was similar to this, was like 20. It's not actually accepting to do like 20 on the dot. And then this one, I think I had at 480, wasn't it? I think it was 490, something like that. Yeah, 490. For some reason it changed, but that's basically what I had before. So 20, 490, 0.490, 900. And then we get that saturated color, which is not what you see this because of the color management. And then scale 130, random walk. So coat, I'm using 0.5. Doesn't matter because we're going to add a map here. And the roughness 0.25, which is basically like the tight spec, right? So let's close those guys here. And let's look if we have anything else we have to do here. So there's one setting here that I didn't use in the past. You have like the caustics in here. Probably not going to use for the skin. I'm definitely going to use for the eyes. It might be a little overkill to use for the skin. But this parameter here, I didn't use in the past. Let's save this one. Store. You see like the indirect diffuse and specular, it's very, very high. It's at 1. So that means that the bounce of the light is bouncing a lot in there. So you're never going to get like a super dark shadow in those areas if you have a lot of bounce. So sometimes it's worth like, let's start with a very low value so you can see the difference in here. And then we're going to grow it and see where we land. So let's say we have like 0.3, for example. So let's see the difference between this right here. And then check this out, like those shadows in there. So this one and this one, right? Very glowy, not so glowy anymore, right? So it kind of respects a little bit of those tight areas. So the light's not gonna bounce around too much in there. Even like the socket of the eye, right? It becomes a little bit like much darker in there, right? So this can be very beneficial, you know? Sometimes you have like a hard time to get like this dark area. Sometimes you see pictures of real faces with a very, very dark little shadow in those cavities. And then if you have something like this, you never get it, you know? So sometimes people are tempted to use like a ambient occlusion pass to just like try to get things a little darker in there. But this one can actually help, you know? It's like, so I would say between 0.3 and 0.5, depending on how much bounce you want, it can be very useful. That means that you're not going to get a lot of light bouncing out of the skin either. I think I found like some information about how much light the skin, this human skin reflects, and I believe it's something around like 0.3, something like that. I have to check actually to try to find out the information. So what I used in the past was actually based like 1 was kind of wrong. So yeah, I started to actually reducing this a little bit. It's like getting like to 1/3 or to half of the original values, and that way I can get like some interesting, results with a little bit more realism and darkness within those areas. So keep that in mind as well. And then the last thing here before we move to the other channels in there. So here, advanced, basically like I'm not gonna use caustics. Geometry, you're not using anything, right? Because we've moved to the displacement. And that's basically it. So like this is the skeleton for the subsurface scattering shader, for the skin shader you guys going to be using. The only thing you're probably not going to have access right now to compare to what I have in here is just the color map itself, right? Because we didn't paint the albedo yet. But all the other parameters, if you copy straight away from what you have here, bear in mind that the scale of your model counts, right? Like, so make sure that the scale is world scale, right? Like if you measure the size of your face in there, let's see how we have. Just to confirm this, guys, because this comes up like all the time. Like people get it wrong. The model they post renders and it looks like a candle, right? It's like, oh, something is wrong here. I was like, yep. So if you click to settings, it's set to centimeters in here, right? So basically, like you have to have this set to centimeters in order for Arnold to use those units. The units are always in centimeters. But just for the sake of measuring this, the height of the face, I'm gonna go to inches in here because that's how we did originally. And I'm just gonna go create measure tools distance. And I'm gonna do this again from the bottom of the chin here all the way to the top of the head. And we got like 8.6. There's the number right there. 8.6 is the number we got. So 8.6 inches, which is like pretty much like spot on the average that we looked at before for a human face, right? Now, if I switch to centimeters, let's see how much that is. That's about 21.86. So like 22 centimeters height, right? So 22 centimeters high. So make sure you have that. It's like 8.6 inches or 22 centimeters height. If you have that, all those parameters that I gave you guys, you should get this. I mean, like I'm doing right in front of you guys. You shouldn't get like any result that looks drastically different from this. So let's resave this one now that we got some results in there. Anytime I see something shiny and pretty, I save it because I don't want to lose whatever was done. And then let's go back to ZBrush and see what we have here. So this is basically the map that I painted, right? Let's talk about the map, the albedo tomorrow. But I'm going to show you the shaders and everything. But in terms of intensity, that's basically what it is. If I get like an average color in here, which is the one I use for the backing here, just to show you what's the average color, I paint the whole thing first before I start doing the rest. If I just click on it here, it gives me this value right here. So basically like I'm using a 237, 179, and 146 for the RGB. That's kind of like the average skin color for like a pale person, right? But you have to remember that from this point here, I actually desaturated things further in Maya by using the color correction node, right? So it's not like a one-to-one. It's kind of like a good starting point, because if you find, for example, like a polarized texture taken from a scan, for example, someone's going to scan the 3D parts and also the texture itself, right? And then the texture is going to be polarized, so you're going to eliminate all the specular and everything. The color should be something kind of similar to this, in terms of values, right? So let's take a look at the other passes in here, because we want a specular map now and a roughness map, so we can actually complete our shader for today before you jump to this other stuff tomorrow. So basically, like this is the little shader, the little painting I have done for the, this one is the specular, right? And you can see that it's kind of like the opposite in here, right? Everything that's supposed to be more specky, it's black, and everything that's supposed to be less specky is white. It doesn't matter how you're gonna do this. I mean, like because you can always reverse this in Maya. I can show you. It's in the texture node, right? Sometimes I go one way, or sometimes I go the other way. For me, it's kind of like easier to imagine things like, okay, I need this to be shinier. For some reason, it's easier for me to see it if I paint black. So I kind of like, it's like a little bit more speck in here, more speck in the nose, a little bit in this internal area, but I'm probably going to tweak that, and a lot more specky in this area here of the eyelids. So the internal part of the eyelids. So if I go like really close around here and I show you that, so basically, like you see, this is the eyelid line right there, and the speck is running right against it right there. So this entire area is almost like completely mirror right there, right? Because it has to look wet. So there's some wetness inside of the nostril in there, like for no reason. And a little bit more of the waxy area here, right? So a little bit shinier inside of the ear, and then a little bit less around here, and then all the way to white completely. So that's basically like the way I painted this. I mean, like I'm gonna kind of like, I think like there's no mystery how to paint it, but I can show you this. It's just like the standard brush, basically, with no alpha assigned whatsoever, and just like using the RGB with very low intensities. So I start painting with like, I don't know, like 3 or 4. So you can, one thing that's tricky here is a bug that the ZBrush has. You see, like if I try to paint this using basic material, it's very hard to see what I'm doing, right? Because the colors are so subtle. So I switch normally to a flat color, which is this shader here, right? So I can see exactly the difference in values and everything. But the problem is, like, if you go to your color picker here and you go to full black, look what's going to happen. It switches shader, right? So it's kind of fucked up. I think I have to talk to them about that. I always complain, but I never tell them. But if you do something like this, for example, like instead of full black, you choose like 1, 1, 1, it goes back, right? So this is the maximum black you can paint basically without having the shader to fuck up the whole thing. Just use like 1, 1, and 1. But it should be black enough, So for the lips in here, it's like if I keep painting like, it's like with like very thin layers, like I see, like I'm using like RGB for 3 in there, you should be able to control this quite a lot. So the way I started, I just painted everything white first. And then with a very, very thin layer like that, I start painting the areas I need more specular, right? So the side of the nose, some more in there. It's a very simple map. And the only way to actually check if those things are working is by rendering all the time, right? So you just paint the mapping here. It's very fast to export. So as soon as you have a map, any map, you just go back to Maya and do a quick render, So I'm just gonna blend this inner part here that was looking a little bit too dark. And then inside of the pocket of the eyes, I completely painted like black in there because that's gonna be shiny. And then in this case here, my model, as I talked about before, I have my carunculus built in the model, right? I'm gonna show you guys when we start talking about the eyes, how this is gonna work. I have to prevent like intersections, so it's trickier to do this way. But at the same time, I can get like better results, I believe, because it's like when I have the carunculus separated, I would get like some glowy things happening when I had intersections. And I never kind of found a way to actually fix that. So that's my attempt in here. Yeah, so basically like this entire area here is going to be super black. Let's get, again, I'm going to just tweak this to color 1, 1. Oops, what am I doing here? I have to use my mouse, sorry. 1, 1, 1. And then I can actually paint this area here to look very, very black around there. So I want like a little bit more shiny overall. Okay, so basically what I'm doing here in terms of specular, I'm trying to use more darks around the forehead because I want that like kind of like sweaty forehead in there. I'm gonna paint a little bit darker actually around here. So the T-zone, if I go like super dark to show you, it would be something like this. You would get like dark in here, and then darken the nose, right? And then around here and then chin, right? Like those areas kind of like, you know, it's like when you're looking at the videos of women in makeup, right? Like they kind of pay attention to this T zone, right? Like they want to neutralize those areas of too much like, you know, reflection and stuff. So, and then from that point on, once I have that established, I just try to go little by little, you know, as like in doing those tests. Remember that if you have a color correction node in Maya, you can actually shift all those values in here. So for example, like if the average value here is a little bit too pale, you can actually crank those things using some offsets in Maya, and then get stuff to look like the gray ones become like completely black, you know, so you get more reflection stuff. And the white ones you can actually bring down to a gray level, for example, so you have a little bit less reflection as well. But if I just go in here and I show you like how to manipulate the color here in ZBrush, I'm just gonna get a little bit shinier around here. Just around the nose, just a little bit. I don't want to get too shiny. Otherwise, it's going to look like he has a runny nose, right? If he gets like too shiny there. Let's just pick this color here. Let's just like eliminate some of the runny nose from here. Let's see. Oops, sorry. Color right here. So a very simple map. You can use like the visual reference. And if you're not seeing much difference between the colors in here, I'm going to tell you to, I can do this for you. I'm going to go to my poly paint, and then under poly paint, thank God they added this, man. They have this adjust colors here. And I tell you what's even better. You can actually have the colors painted in HD, and then you can go to the adjust colors outside of HD and adjust stuff, and then it works for the HD all the way up there. It kind of propagates it somehow. I didn't notice like a lot of artifacts by doing that, so I think it works fine. So I'm going to go to adjust colors, and then check this out. So if I look at the model here, you cannot see much, right? But if I do like a contrast in here, so basically those are the colors that I'm using right there. See like darker in the forehead, tip of the nose, slightly darker like in the lips, but still less than the nose itself. A little bit in the inner part of the lower eyelids, and pretty much like very shiny inside of the eyelids themselves, right? Like all the way. Ears, you know, getting darker in there. And then there's some darkness in the cheeks as well. So the cheeks gonna definitely get some of the specular happening there. But it's pretty much like everything is happening around the face right now. I don't have much painted in the other parts. So I'm just gonna go back here to my RGB and then, you know, cancel it. But let's export this map here and see if we can notice any difference when we're back to Maya. So let's name it. This is going to be our specular. So I'm going to rename it to specular 2. And it's going to be the same deal. Like I'm going to export this as 4K maps. In this case here, it can be even be like a 2K. You see like the map's not super detailed or anything, right? One thing that I do as well is to create a little bit more noise. In my past classes, you're going to notice that I painted like the specular map with much more noise. But the thing is like, it becomes more artifacts than anything else, you know, it's like if you have too noisy. So it doesn't stop you guys from doing this. Let's do like a spray. Let's remove the coloring here. And then let's say, let's pretend here, let's do like a darker color. And then I'm gonna start with, let's do it a very large intensity so you can see it. But so for example, like, let's get the, let's see, maybe a smaller alpha in here. Something like maybe 46, something like that. So I can start with something like this just to show you. But at the end of the day, if you do too much noise like this, it starts to look more like puddles depending of, you know, it's like if it's a very clean area, which doesn't have a lot of displacement, for example, it becomes kind of like little puddles of sweat or something, you know? So if you want to do something like that, do like with a very low intensity. Let's see, 1. Just to have some variation, something like that, you know? So basically like those areas here are gonna look a little bit more shiny. And then try to incorporate like some variation as well in the size. So you start with a big brush, for example. And then you can go like smaller and smaller. And then as you get smaller, you can actually increase the intensity as well. So you see like now, have a little bit more of this. No, everything that's dark here is going to be more shiny, right? Because of it's reversed in my model here. But anything to incorporate a little bit more complexity in each one of those layers. But you cannot go too crazy with the with this variation here, because it becomes more like artifacts at some point. Keeping things simple, it's always easier because it's easier to actually bug track what's happening. If you add like too much stuff, like it becomes like kind of hard. But yeah, just a little bit of noise in there again, like to show you what I did here, so you can see, because of the compression later is going to kill it for you. But basically this, see, like there's like all those little specks in there now. So basically that's basically what I did. So I just renamed this guy here to Specular 2. Let's just export those maps. It's going to be 2K, so to save us a lot of memory, right, like hard drive. So let's do Specular 2. Should be very fast, especially at 2K. It should take just a few seconds. There you go, 9 seconds. In the past, I would use like one subdivision level higher than this for some of those maps, but now I'm just like sticking with like 1 million polygons, right? But if you need more detail, I mean, like you can always subdivide this mesh once more and then paint again, right? Like, and get some more detail out of it, but it should be fine actually. So, and then I have the specular, and now I'm gonna go to the roughness. So for the roughness, it's a very similar map overall, right? It's like it's almost the same thing actually. I could get a way of using the same map, based like the specular and the roughness, but I keep separate, because if I want to do some extra tweaks, then I can use this one. But for now, let's just export as roughness 2, and then we're gonna be tweaking this map later. So let's go again to texture, create all maps, roughness 2.
Is this level good for like tiny veins and all that stuff?
Tiny veins for what do you mean, like for the albedo?
Yeah.
Oh no, the albedo we're gonna work on the HD model.
Okay.
Yeah, for the albedo we're gonna work with like 100 million polygons. You're gonna have like a lot of space for super tiny details. This is just like the secondary maps. We don't need anything too fancy at this point. But let's take a look here. This guy, right? So we have the, I think it's the same position, so we can actually compare in there. So let's try to, maybe, let's see, view, select. Let's just lock this camera, so I'm not at risk. And then, okay, so let's plug one of those maps in here. So we have our shader net working here. And then we're gonna need to incorporate a specular map, right? So the specular is gonna be a little interesting here, because we're gonna plug like straight away the way we see it and see what's happening first. And then I can show you how to tweak it, because we're definitely gonna need some offsets or reverse that mask, that color, to be able to see anything. So let's do this. We're gonna, under the weight in here, you're just gonna plug those maps. So file, gonna turn it off. You can keep it on for this one. I like to have it off for displacement, but you can keep it on for the other maps. Although it's going to be just like it's not going to be movement. So it's not like we're going to be seeing any artifacts when he moves or anything. UDIM. And then we're going to pick this specular. It can be any one of those here, because we have UDIM. So you should recognize 5 tiles. So that's basically it. And then, so the first thing you're going to notice here is that you would have to have like more shininess inside of this area here. And what might happen here is that we are not going to be seeing that because I think the map is reversed. So let's see, just double checking if I store this. Let's try it again with this way, and let's see how it looks like first. So let's compare this one with this guy here. Not much difference. I think like using like the 50% average kind of was a good start in there. And also I have to pay attention that the other map is not interfering with it, right? The other specular. So let's go back here. Let me just turn off for now the coat is at 0.5. So I can actually pay attention to just the spec itself, right? The spec from this guy here should be the very broad one. So I'm seeing a little bit here and a little bit there. So let's see what happens if I reverse this mask. So let's this map. Let's just store this again. And then also, let's reduce this to something very shiny for now. So we can see exactly what we're doing. So yeah, it looks like it's very specky in there. It's hard to see with all the displacement. And it's like it's good if you can do a little, for example, like if you go to your render settings in here, you can always do this. If you go to the diagnostics tab, you can turn off, for example, bump, and you can turn off the displacement. So you can see exactly where the, the spec is. So let's take a look. So the spec is happening right now. So if you brought a map in here, the map is reversed, because bear in mind that, the specular we're using is basically the weight, right? So the weight here, that means that anything that's black has no weight. So basically no specular. And everything that's white is super specky. But we are using the reverse of that because we painted everything white, and then where we need more spec is black. So it's the opposite, right? So what we're going to do here, I'm going to go click this map where we just imported. So the map is right there. And then if you scroll down, you're going to have this effects tab in here. And then in the effects tab, you can just click invert. And that should reverse the whole thing, right? So now, before it was basically like considering everything the same color. Not the same color, but I mean like the contrast was very small. And now we are having like the expected result. But the thing is like, because everything is so subtle, sometimes we have to tweak this values here as well. So under the color balance, if you click color balance, you're going to notice like if you just click alpha is luminance, now you're going to start seeing the areas correctly, right? So alpha is luminance. So if it's too shiny, for example, there's a way for you to tweak right here in Maya, which is like bringing the alpha gain down, right? So you can tweak that. So you see like it went away quite a lot. And then if I want like 50% of that, I can just use that. The alpha is luminance is, it's what affects, for example, like black and white maps, right? So if you bring like a map, like a bump map or a specular map like this, alpha is luminance normally is what makes the map actually working here. So so at this point here, I'm starting to control it, right? So I get more shininess in there in those areas. And then let's see, if, for example, like around the face, let's try to just like zoom out in here and see how the rest of the face looks like. Oops, it's locked. Let's unlock it. So let's see. The map is like a simple map. It's the kind of stuff that slowly you're gonna have to tweak it, right? I removed the it's like the bump and everything, but we can see that the specular is mostly like the lips, right? It's very shiny around the lips, and then a little bit around the cheeks. Let's see if we can spin it around a little bit. So around there, right? And in a lot in the lips. So basically like the map should be working fine. Another way to see just the map is to click again, like the diagnostics in here. If you turn off the subsurface, you should be able to see just the spec. So where is the subsurface here, right here? So right here is gonna go, like I'm gonna show you just a specular map, right? So it's basically like just around those areas we talked about. If you wanna see it better, then you can actually go back to the specular value that we just play with it, right? I brought back to 100 here for the roughness. I'm gonna bring back to that original value that was 460 for the very broad spec, right? And now you can actually see what's being affected in here, right? So it's kind of like, it's a
little trick from Glauco that he would, to check his spec maps, he would make the mesh entirely black, but then he would check the specular separately so you could actually see it. This is a similar thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. These overrides here are very, very cool, man, because we don't need to mess up with anything, Instead of like turning off like depth of field and stuff, you just ignore it in here, and it's like super cool. Now, what we were doing here, I mean, like I'm trying to show you guys like the areas with the specular, like in terms of the intensity of the specular. Those maps here, as I said before, you can actually tweak them to have like offsets. For example, like everything that's black, you can offset it. So you can actually bring up like this. So you can see like the map's going to start to change in there, right? So it becomes like from black offsetting towards white. And then this one here, you offset like from white to black, right? So you can actually eliminate it. So this way you can actually have a map that even doesn't have a lot of contrast coming out of ZBrush, which is the case with my map, and you still be able to control and actually separate the values a little bit more this way, right? Now, one thing that we want to do as well is that you see, like I have the roughness at 460 here, right? And I want it to be at 460 because this is like my, how you call like the sebum, which is the sweat pass, right? But more importantly, we want to make sure that this pass in here, which is the coat itself, which in our case here now we are using as the main specular. Let's just crank it a little bit here and let's see how it shows through this. So you see like it's pretty much even because it doesn't have a map to filter anything. So what we're gonna do, you're gonna have to use the roughness map in here, because you know what's gonna happen. Look at this. If I bring it down, it gets like super shiny, right? It's basically like a clear coat right there. If I go too high, now it becomes like, you know, it's like a very, very broad speck like this. So we can use a roughness mapping here to control that. Because remember, like the logic here is that if you have like blacks, that means that's a little bit more shiny overall. And if you have whites, it becomes more rough, right? Because, you know, if you look at here, the roughness go from 0 all the way to 1. So 0 is black, 1 is white, right? So we can plug a map in here and see how that works. So let's see. Let's just like, again, as usual, just for comparison, store snapshot. And let's plug like not in the code in here in the value, but the roughness itself, because we want to have some variation. You know, it's like it's not like, you know, it's like with the sebum pass, which is the roughness for the specular in here. I'm not going to change this with the map. I'm going to keep like always at 460. It's kind of, I like that overall look of the super broad spec across the entire model. But this one here, I have to modulate it. So the lips have to be shinier, but certain areas have to be a little bit rough. So I'm going to be using a roughness map here. Let's click this one. Let's click the file again. Same deal, same deal. Turn it off here. Mari. Turn off my generate texture. And then let's just get the mapping here. I'm going to use the roughness we just exported, which is a very simple map. We might have to use some offsets using this 2 slides in here, right? So I'm going to click Alpha's Luminous. Let's see what happens here. So now I'm getting a little bit more interesting, right? Like the nose is looking a little shinier now. Look in comparison to the previous shot. Pretty plain, right? And boring. Now I'm getting like super shiny detail right around the, you know, it's like the eyelids, right? And then the tip of the nose. If I, again, like if I want to play with this here, I can. I mean, like everything that was black in there, if I bring it up, it's going to basically reduce the specularity of those areas, right? And everything that was a little bit more like subdued and, you know, it's like a little bit less shiny, I can actually compensate and make everything shiny by bringing this down. And then you see like this whole area here gets super shiny now. So that's a matter of like, you know, it's like finding the sweet spot. But I think the way it is, the way it came from ZBrush, it already, it's pretty cool. The way I, you know, it's like I painted very subtle in there. The subtlety is actually translating here. So let's see this now under, so we have the map assigned for the, let's see, let's go back in here. The map assigned for the roughness, and for the weight, it's kind of like it's a plain intensity at this point, right? We're gonna probably like use another mapping here to control the intensity of the coat. You know, it's like to filter some areas out. But at this point, let's just keep at 0.5, kind of generic like this. And then for the specular, we have just like 460 and just like the specular color plugged in there. So, you know, it's a little bit different approach for both of those channels. So let's try going back here, and let's not ignore the subsurface anymore. So now I can see that. And let's not ignore like bump. or displacement. And things start to get a little bit more interesting now. It still have like a right around here. You see my caruncular in there. It still has all those details from the micro bump, right? The micro bump is pretty much right there. So let's take a look. I think that's gonna be like have time to do this, and then we're kind of done for today. But yeah, I'm glad I was able to cover most of those maps today. And then the only thing missing for you is going to be really the color of the skin in here. But let's try this. Right, so right now we have like the stuff that we need, like the intensity seems good in there. The amount of specular looks good in there, but it's very, very crusty, right? Because, there is no separation. Everything has the micro bump everywhere. So what we can do here, it can be very hacky, is we can use the same map that we're using for the specular, and you can use this map to control the height of the bump, right? Like not the bump, but the cell noise, right? So basically, like it's going to be the same principle. I mean, like they have to coincide, right? Like so, if it's inside of the eyelids, you don't want any bumpness in there. For the lips, I might have to actually create another version of this guy here and just like make it a little bit darker if I want to completely eliminate the bumps from the lips, right? But let's see what we can do with the same map. So we're going to use this as a placehold. So right now, let's just save this one. So store. I'm going to bring this. And let's just pretend for a second here that I'm actually using a different map for this. But it's going to be just the same, so we can actually save some time for now. If it works all the way to the end of the project, great. If it doesn't, then I just know that I have to use a different map, So let's just bring this one here over. And let's clean up like whatever we have in terms of nodes in here. So just click the mesh, graph materials and selected object. So our entire network looks like this right now. So it doesn't have a lot, right? It's kind of simple. And then, so let's take a look here. So which one I'm looking for again? Oh, it's for the AI color correct. No, where is it? Oh, this guy here, the displacement. So I'm looking for the cell noise. So the cell noise is right here. So what are we gonna do here now? We're gonna play with this color. Remember, like to get just a tiny little bit of displacement, I use like 0.03 in here. It's not even showing right there. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna plug a texture in here now. So I'm gonna click this one, file, same deal, off. And then this one off. It's gonna be always the same. And then Mari right there. And then I'm gonna just pick the map, and I'm gonna use let's do the specular one. Let's use the specular bump. Actually, the specular has some of the noise. It might look a little funny. Let's do the roughness. They are very similar. So the roughness one. So at this point here, if I just try to render, it's probably gonna be very strong, right? Because yeah, the map doesn't have a lot of contrast, right? And it's very, very light overall. So I'm probably gonna have to bring these values down by a lot. So let's see how we can do this. Let's try to render first and see what happens. If it's like crazy in there, all we're gonna have to do here is turn on the properties here, turn alpha is luminous, and then we're gonna bring this alpha gain down by a lot. So let's try to render and see how the displacement behaves. Let's save it. Then render. So you see like the colors are very different because look at the amount of displacement. It's like it's spike, right? It looks like feathers right now. It's kind of cool. Let's do like that. I like it. So I'm gonna bring this alpha gain in here to a similar value like we had before. Let's start a little higher so you can see the difference. So 0.1. It's gonna be very crusty still, going down, right? But the value that we used at the end was like 0.03. Still pretty strong. Actually, let's see. Is this the value I have to use? I think in this case here is the color gain that's gonna influence it. Okay, I think that's it. So instead of using that one, I'm gonna do the same thing but with the color gain. Okay, so for color gain, I'm gonna just do like a 0.003, something like that. It's funny that goes back to 0, 0 in there. So weird. It's the freaking color management, man. Let's try without the color management. Let's try 0.003. Let's increase a little bit so we can see it, right? 50. At least we're going to be able to see something. So you see like it's getting a little bit more displacement around there, but where we had the specular painted as black, it's completely shiny now. So comparing to this one, like we eliminated all those crusties from there. So now I just have to find the right value, right? Which we tested before, and we came to the conclusion that it was around 0.03. I can even try like 0.05 now that we have a map. And then let's see. So now we can see like I have some shininess right there, some shininess around here, and then comparing to this one. So a little bit more interesting now. So let's look at the rest of the facing here, what's happening. Let's see if they can do a little quicker render for us. Yeah, that's gonna look much more interesting now. And especially like I wanna check like the tip of the nose. So let me get this a bit smaller. Stop, there you go. Start this again around here. You see now I get a little bit of that speck at the tip of the nose. Very, very shiny around there. So there's no more bump assigned to that area. Super shiny. And then the nose, let's see. Also the forehead, I want to check out how the forehead's looking like. But one thing at a time. Let's see, nose and lips around here. I don't have enough light around the lips in there, but if everything is working accordingly here, we should have a little bit more specular in the lips and much less bumpiness, right? Like from the micro bump. Meanwhile, the micro bump is still quite present around here, which is actually added that nice effect of the super nice breakup. Same for this area here. And then what would be missing the most here in the skin is actually, you know, tiny little details like some spots and stuff and little veins and breakups. But in general, that would be a good starting point for the skin right here. And then obviously like keeping the sculpting going, right? Like I don't have anything sculpted for the upper lips, for example. So it's still very, very plain and boring in there. Let's just cancel this one and move this one up. I hate this, like, see like the center, if I try to click the center, it doesn't work. This was introduced like in one of the latest versions of Arnold. So basically like the center is actually up here. It depends on the resolution. So if I click around here, then I can actually move the square. It's kind of weird. It's all those bugs, man. It's like it's a minefield. I mean, like all the bugs you have to deal with ZBrush, all the bugs you have to deal with Maya, and it only comes with experience, you know. It's like after years fighting those softwares, you kind of like, you learn know what to avoid. I remember ZBrush had like a bunch of functions and stuff I would always avoid touching, you know. It's like a couple of versions ago, I mean, like there was something I would click 2 things in a row and then it would always crash for me for some reason. So I learned not to do that. And then sometimes I would forget and click it. And then right after I clicked, I was like, shit. And then sure enough, the crash would come. And with Maya, it's kind of similar, you know. It's like you have those little traps, especially with XGen. XGen sometimes, like if you do a bunch of undos, it breaks the connection in the middle of the undos, and then if you didn't save before, then it's like all fucked, you know. So it's kind of it's a minefield. But look at that, man. We're starting to get some skin, which is cool, huh? Eventually, this is going to start work. Is that?
Chris sir,
Yeah.
regarding that displacement map, the balloony thing that happened, I have experienced that like a couple of times. I don't know what's the reason that's causing that, because initially I thought there was something wrong I was doing with the export from ZBrush, but then sometimes when I reload it, it takes like proper displacement, but most of the times I don't know what's the reason that's causing the balloony thing that happened initially when you plug the displacement map right here.
Yeah, you saw like I got that ballooning happening there because I plugged the displacement not in the correct way first. And then as soon as I actually removed it and I did it again, it worked. But in terms of the intensity, you're doing everything according to what I said, like in terms of the base, you're switching to 0, right, in ZBrush before the export.
Yeah. I haven't tried it right now. Like beforehand, when I was doing displacement, I was doing it with almost similar settings to what you have told. I hope it doesn't happen. But I wanted to know what's the reason that causes that ballooniness, because I couldn't figure it out.
Well, it might be a lot of different things, man. My guess would be like either the maps are, for example, like not matching. Sometimes it happens because like the UVs are not matching the maps. So I don't think that's the case, because you probably have like a matching UVs in both. Sometimes is the floor, right? Like, so for example, like when I mentioned like the values that I use for my displacement export, I switched like from 0 to from 0.5 to 0 in here. So it's important that you use like 0 and then 32 and EXR. So like really paying attention to those values in here. And it's very important that you use the switch morph target together with that, it's like delete switch import, right? And then other than that, is just the settings in Maya itself. I mean, like if I go to click the model itself and then the second tab, making sure that you have everything matching here as well, like for the displacement. So subdivision, you're going to have something like this, iterations like 3 or 4. And then you're going to switch to Catmull-Clark object and then linear, make sure it's linear in there. And then for the attributes, you start with 1. And then from that point on, you can actually, it's like play with it and see if you need more displacement or not. But that's basically it. It's like other than that, I don't know any other settings that would cause that,
Yeah. So one question I had regarding this, the same thing. I think I think this is a mistake that I used to do. The iterations that you are taking all the way to 4, I never used to touch that setting mostly while I was rendering things. What I used to do, the mesh, the base mesh, I used to press 3, like for the mesh smooth. I never used to smooth the mesh. So when I import it from ZBrush, the mesh that I'm rendering, I should keep it like at 1 and do this smooth and like smooth, soften the edges, and then I should because with the iterations.
Yeah, because what happens, like you see, like my model in the viewport is unsmooth, right? So if I I think like the first version that Arnold had for Maya, it would not take in account. I mean, like it would just like if I'm not mistaken, you would take in only account like the subdivisions in here. But now what it's doing basically, like I think, is to prevent people from, it's like if you want to render something with displacement, to make sure that it's rendered with displacement. If you have subdivision levels here by pressing 3, like you said, that subdivision, let's say, like it subdivides like 3 or 4 times. And if you add more iterations in here, that adds another 2 or 3 subdivision levels on top of what you had in the viewport. And that's going to most likely make your machine crash. So you make sure that it's unsmooth. So turn it off so you can keep it 1 in there, like just press 1 so it's unsmooth, right? And then here you just add iterations to between like 3 and 4. 3, it should be good enough for a lot of stuff. 4 to me is more like ideal. And then 5 is kind of pushing your machine, depending of, it doesn't matter how much RAM you have. When you go like to 5, it's at risk of like starting to crash, So I normally keep like at 4, and I make sure that I have the auto bump on in here with all the parameters. So because that's going to shift things and make sure that everything is rendered with subsurface scattering. Now there's one thing here that I forgot to mention. I just mentioned the enable auto bump in here. And in the past, I mentioned to you guys that for now I would keep it off. Let's see if I still have it off. So under advanced in here, it's off. You see, like we can do like a quick test. The thing that happens is that that's very demanding. So let's say if I create like a little window here. So let's save this version here again. and see if we can see any difference between this one here and when you render with auto bump in SSS. So what this is doing is basically this. Let's talk about the technicalities in here. So this slide here is actually subdividing my mesh physically during render time, right? So if my mesh had like 2 polygons, goes to subdivide, you know, whatever times in there, like 4 times that, right? Not 4 times, but like 2 becomes 4, and then 4 becomes 16, and so on. And then basically this is going to subdivide the mesh itself, but the bump, enable auto bump, what's going to do is that once it reaches a limit, which in the case of my model is definitely going to reach a limit. My model was supposed to have like 92 million polygons, right? So let's just do like a calculation here. For example, if you look at here, my model right now has 22.586. So 22.586, right? Something like that. So I'm gonna divide by subdivide subdivide 1 time. So like times 4, times 4, times 4. So basically, my model at the end of the day here has a subdivision 1, subdivision 2, 3, 4, right? So I think like maybe subdividing once more, I'm not sure. But even if it is subdividing once more, it's getting to a maximum of 5,000,00700. So like 6 million polygons maximum that's subdividing my mesh in render time, right? But my my detail, I have detail that's worth like 92 million polygons. And the only reason you're seeing everything in here is because the auto bump is activated. So basically like it's shifting everything that's not able to fit within the iterations themselves, shifting to a kind of like a virtual bump map, right? It's not quite a bump map. It's more like a displacement, like a, you know, that's kind of like a, I don't know exactly how to explain, but kind of like a pseudo bump map, but it's more like a displacement map. And then the thing is like when you render this, you want to make sure that you want to, you know, it's like if the subdivision levels, for example, like the difference between the 4th level, which is like 6 million polygons, all the way to 92 million polygons, it's a big difference, for example, like in terms of how much the form is being displaced. Sometimes the subsurface scatter is not going to be calculated within the bump itself, because it's kind of like a pseudo, you know, displacement that's happening. But if you use auto bump in SSS, the subsurface scattering is going to be calculated within all the tiny details that are coming from the bump itself. So the difference might be super tiny though. That's why we're going to render it here just to test. But the thing is, like, it adds like a ton of more like a render time sometimes. And if it's not producing like a very, very, you know, detailed difference between the 2 parts, then sometimes it's not worth it. In this case here, seems like it's worth it because it's actually calculating some, it's becoming darker. And I like that because I want to make sure that you know, it's like there are ways, obviously, you can always tweak things like we always did in the past, which was like faking things using like a cavity map. And the cavity map would just like color it a little bit more reddish, and then mix the cavity map with the color itself, just to get a little bit more darkness inside of the scatter, right? Like inside of the each pore. But in this case here, if I have the auto bump on, there's a difference already. So between, let's see, let's just stop this one. So this one here has the you know, it's like the auto bump subsurface scattering, and this one does not, right? On, off, on, off. So it's definitely adding some more depth to the pores themselves. But I would say like that this type of setting here, I would save kind of like for less, because the difference from a distance is not huge like that, right? It's just a little bit more of, yeah. Because like it adds a lot of render time, so you guys can keep working on your models all the way without the auto bump in SSS, and then once you're happy with it, then you turn it on, and it should add that extra juice, you know, it's like it's gonna look nicer overall. But yeah, you guys have any more questions? I mean, like I kind of like for today, I think I'm kind of happy that we managed to actually put at least like this skeleton subsurface scattering shader, you know, the skin shader, so you can play with it already. And then the only thing that's going to be missing again is going to be like a simple color map. You can do something like this, just like as a placeholder, you know, it's like just like very basic stuff. I only use the like the spray brush in here, so a standard brush with the spray on, and without the color variation. So I always like turn it off, this color in here. And then a little alpha, let's say like a small one, like one of those 51, something like that, 45. And then just to add a little bit of that, and then tomorrow I'm going to be explaining how I paint my maps. And it's kind of similar approach, it's like I start with a very, just like a single color overall. And then I paint like, oh, one thing I did actually in the past class, I did an experiment and seemed like people liked it. Just to draw like a parallel for you guys to understand what I'm talking about. If you look at the props that we have at ILM, for example, you're going to see lots of latex masks, like from old movies, like you have Ghostbusters and all kinds of stuff in there in the studio. And you see the way that they painted this stuff. It was very, very saturated colors, It's like they had to obviously play to the camera. So the camera would kind of like desaturate that stuff. So in order for you to see like in a dark scene, you have to have like more saturation overall. But even when you see like latex masks hand painted, you have to try to simulate that the translucency, which is not there. The latex is not going to have a lot of subsurface scatter. It's not like silicone, right? So people would basically, like those artists, they would paint like very strong colors first, like very saturated, like let's say like the greens would be super green, like around eyes and like some blues around the eyes as well. The veins really, really strong as well. And then it's slowly like covering that entire thing with different passes, different layers, until you have like this kind of like, it's almost like painting with oils when you have like very, very diluted, layers of oil. You just like create those tiny little, it's like super thin layers, and you can create this depth that, it's like you can put a lot of stuff, like a lot of information in there, like creating depth. So I did this as a test in the past class, and I think I probably going to do this again, because that way it was easier for the students to see what I was doing, because the compression really destroys everything. If I'm painting everything subtle like I normally do in my own stuff, you guys are not going to see what I'm doing. So I can start with that and then slowly covering up everything and then doing like different passes, But yeah, we're going to talk about this tomorrow for sure.
Excuse me, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And just real quick about that switch to morph. I always forget, do I save a morph at the lowest or at the highest subdivision?
It's going to be always at the lowest. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, like it's going to be a few steps. Let's just do like one time here. So basically, I'm going to have so my mesh is going to be right there. I'm going to go to the lowest level. And then I'm going to do, let's say, I think like 4 steps, right? The first one is going to be export the mesh. So we're going to export it let's see, base temp 1. And then once it's exported, I'm going to do the morph target stuff. So I'm going to go to delete anything I have in terms of morph target. So delete everything. And then you're going to do store switch, and then back here and import. And then the import is going to be the base mesh you just exported. And that's about it.
And what is that all about? I'm so confused right in that.
Well,
like why?
I was confused too, man. When I asked so fair, it didn't make any sense. It still doesn't make a lot of sense, but it kind of does in a way, because what happens in here is that the morph target, it saves basically 2 states, right? So it's basically like it compares to whatever is in the buffer. So when you store it, it stores in this buffer, right? And you switch, basically like you're bringing that the difference between the 2 meshes, basically, which like in this case has no difference. It's basically exactly the same model. This is all to make sure that the model that you are comparing to during the export is exactly the same. Because what would happen in the past is that people would be sculpting, and then they would go back to the lowest resolution mesh. And then if they didn't recreate the cage, there's even a button. I think it's still there to recreate.
Still there, yeah.
Yeah. It would create a big difference between what was sculpted and the original base mesh, because there was a lot of changes done. So if you do something like this, you basically like make sure that the model you're exporting the displacement from is compared to a model that's exactly the same. It's almost like recreating the cage, right? And then, so basically like what's going to happen here during this export time, you're going to turn on your switch morph target. So what ZBrush is going to be doing behind the curtain in there is going to compare everything that's like high resolution detail that came after that subdivision level that you just stacked. So instead of like recreating like a big difference between the original base mesh and a model that was sculpted, is going to be comparing to itself and then just recreating the difference of the highest resolution that goes after that level was created. And then that way you create like a perfect match between ZBrush and Maya, in terms of render, because there is no discrepancies in terms of like the difference between the base meshes.
All right, I'm gonna act like I understand, but I'm still confused. But
Yeah.
I'll try my best to
No, it's okay.
watch.
No,
You explained it great. You explained it. I got like this grip that I just can't figure that out. But I get it
Yeah.
somewhat.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
like
gonna lie and say I get it.
funny because like when Ofer explained to me on the phone, in his head it made all the sense in the world, and to me I was exactly like you. I was like, what? But the fact is, like, we tried it and it solved all the problems that we had. It's like in terms of the big differences we are seeing, like all those bigger farms represented in the displacement map, and all of a sudden they're all gone, and we are seeing just the poor detail and stuff. And it's like, oh, that's what we need,
Yeah, because when you move things around in the highest level, it does affect that base mesh.
It does,
right? And it does move those polygons around.
Yep.
Okay, so
yeah,
because I've definitely noticed the difference where I was like, hey, my base mesh wasn't altered like that, and then
and that has the potential to generate like double transformation. So instead of like recreating just the fine detail to conform to the mesh, all of a sudden like the ears look like double transformation, so that it's much more displaced than you expect. And this way is the way I use to actually make sure that it's a one-to-one translation between what I'm sculpting and what I'm seeing in Maya.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, guys, I'm gonna let you be. I'm gonna wait for this compression to end. It's gonna take about 2 hours, and meanwhile I'm gonna try to poke around a little bit more and get all ready for tomorrow to paint these textures, and then the eye stuff we're gonna be exploring the day after. Normally is on the Tuesday, but this time it's gonna be on a Wednesday. But we are getting there. I mean, like the skin is gonna be looking kind of nice tomorrow, and then adding the eyes is gonna just like start like really to come to life. All right, guys, have a great one.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
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 Take care, everyone.
You too.